G'day, Alistair here, and in this video we are going to make plum wine. Now, to do that, the first thing we need is, well, we need a plum stone. And what I'm going to do, so this is that ground is really hard. Anyway, poke that into ground. We'll probably need to water it a bit, and in a few months' time we might have a plum tree growing come spring. Now, that's obviously not going to give plums for a wee while, but we are not going to wait until we have a plum tree, because I have prepared one earlier. Now, this tree here is a plum tree we've grown from seed, and there are a few more down here, but if we were to plant this, maybe 10 to 15 years, we'd get enough fruit of it to make some wine. But of course, you know, we don't have that long. So here is one that I prepared earlier. So this tree was planted probably about 12 years ago, and it would have been a bit bigger than the tree we looked at previously. This one would have been a graft rather than grown from seed. And that things from grafts tend to grow plums or fruit much earlier, so it might take a lot longer for that plum tree we saw earlier to get to this kind of scale. But this tree has grown extremely well, and there are a huge number of plums on here. Now, we're going to be making about 20 litres of wine, and for that we'll need approximately 6 kilos of fruit, which about 14 pounds or something like that. And so we're going to fill a basket. I'm going to start by collecting whatever I can find on the ground and tossing as far as I can anything that's not suitable, so I don't mistake it for next time. And then we'll start on the tree if we need to. So let's get onto it.
I've sped this up by a factor of 30, as you really don't need to see me pick up every single plum in real time. Last year we had geese, and they would clean up everything that fell from the tree pretty quickly. Unfortunately, they decided one of our neighbours across the road were nicer than us. Their traitorous departure may have been precipitated by a couple of meals on our part of slow-cooked goose. We found that over 20 geese were too many. Now we have none, so that worked well. I'm tossing anything that is more than about a quarter damaged or past its best by date. Anything looking okay is going in the basket.
As you can see, I've collected quite a few plums. There's quite a few like damaged plums like this. I'll just chop that off. Others are perfect, but I think I need a little bit more, so let's go pull them off the tree.
I'm not just grabbing any random plums from the tree, I'm after the ripest ones. I'm going for the darkest plums and pulling on them gently. If they don't come off, I'm leaving them on the tree.
So I'm going to call that enough. Let's go back inside and start chopping them up. So I'm going to start by measuring out a couple of kilos of plums on the scales. I'll just turn them on and zero them. Yep. And as I mentioned, for a 20 litre batch of wine, which we're going to do in this bucket. If you look behind me, you can see a number of wines already in progress. Okay, that's 1 kilo and 2 kilos. So basically all I'm going to do is take plums out of that. So this has got some bad bits on it, so I'm just going to chop out those, and they're in the food scraps along with any bits of grass. And then I'm just going to remove the stone and then throw that in there and rinse and repeat until done. So that one doesn't look too bad. With plum stones, you either have free stones, which come out really easily, or these, which are clingstones, which basically you need to cut out. You can't pull them out very readily. So it's good to use the bad plums. If I was making plum jam, I'd put a bit more selective about the, mostly picking undamaged plums. But for the purposes of wine, we can just use pretty much the lesser quality fruit, because we're not really keeping any of the fruit itself, just the juice and flavour. Okay, so I will carry on and speed this up, and this is probably going to take me quite some time to get through. So we've been going 3 minutes, and I've done about five plums, so do the math on that. Now, you don't actually need to remove the stones, because what we need to do is we need to macerate the plums, and you can do that with a potato masher, and if you've got plum stones in that, that's fine. That's nice and easy. But what we're going to do is we're going to use a stick blender, and so I don't want any stones in there when I go through and stick blend the pulp. So yes, let's go for it.
I'm removing anything that is damaged, too squishy, or discoloured from the plums. If there is anything you're unsure about, cut a piece off and taste it, obviously discarding anything that's no good. Pretty quickly you'll recognise what you want to keep or discard just from looking at it. I'm aiming for 6 kilos of plums, but the exact amount required is obviously related to how flavourful the plums are and the final taste you want to achieve. These plums have predominantly yellow flesh, but our wine is going to turn out red because of the strong colour contained in the plum skins. For more of a yellow or white wine, you're going to need both the skins and flesh to be of a light colour. The skins contribute colour, tannin and flavour to the ferment. The deep red and purple pigments are anthocyanins, the same antioxidant compounds that are popularly associated with health benefits. Plum wine is probably most popular in East Asia, notably Japan, but also Eastern Europe, with a bit in the UK, Germany and Austria. Here in New Zealand, while we have a substantial wine industry based on grapes, there is very little wine made from other fruit, despite the conditions being ideal for growing plums and other stone fruit. Plums belong to the Rosaceae family, making them botanical relatives of peaches, cherries, almonds and apricots, which means that you can use this recipe almost exactly for many other kinds of stone fruit. I've used apricots, cherries, peaches and nectarines as the basis of this recipe, but also a great variety of other fruit, such as blackberries, blueberries, feijoas, strawberries, and many others. Plum remains have been found at Neolithic archaeological sites alongside olives, grapes, and figs. They may be one of the very first fruits domesticated by humans. There are roughly 2,000 varieties of plums worldwide, coming in colours ranging from deep purple and red through yellow, green, and almost black. China is the world's largest producer of plums, followed by Romania and Serbia. Together they produce a significant share of the roughly 12 million tonnes grown globally each year.
Well, that took more than an hour, and I feel like I massacred those plums. But that was in total about 6.4 kilos, and there's at least 1.5 kilos there, I think. So we've probably got about 5 kilos of actual good plums. And so I'm going to get cleaned up, and then we'll proceed to the next step. Next up, I'm going to add some boiling water. So this jug is about 1.7 litres, so I'm adding that, and I'm going to do the same again. And here comes the second jug. So you probably want to put in 3 to 3.5 litres, or less. You could probably get away with a lot less, but I like to put this in because it gives a bit more opportunity to extract flavour. Next up is the stick blender. So primarily I want to break up the fruit into smaller pieces so that it is easy to filter and extract the juice. I don't want to completely blend it into mush, but I want to get all the big bits out. That'll probably do.
Our next step is to filter the fruit so we only have the liquid. I'm moving the bench over below a hook where I can hang the filter bag. Apologies for the background audio of children's television. The string on my filter bag is a bit short, so I need to prop up the pot slightly. Our fruit mixture is called Tblsp, or though sometimes it's also called mash, although this more relates to grain-based distilling. I'm going to transfer our must into a filter bag, which is challenging to do solo as the bag is too small to fit all the way around the pot. I'm hooking one side around the handle and holding the other side with my hand. The next stage is to hang the filter bag from the hook. This needs to be done carefully so as not to splatter plum juice everywhere. I don't want to repeat what I did with my last batch, where the string broke. While I did not witness this myself, my son said that it was like a volcano. Suffice to say, the cleanup was considerable. I find that I am constantly cleaning up during this process, either cleaning up splatters or rinsing items for their next reuse. While our must is filtering, I've cleaned out the bucket and we now want to sanitize the inside of it. Everything that's going to go in contact with our wine needs to be sanitized. Sorry about the flickering, it's from the cheap LEDs on the range hood. It's not visible outside of this recording. I could leave the filter bag overnight to drain, but I'm impatient, so I'm helping the process along. What I'm doing is trying not to squeeze the bag too much, but instead move the mash around inside the bag so the liquid can more easily escape rather than be forced out. You can get a filter bag from a brew store or AliExpress, or do what I did for many years and use a synthetic laundry bag with string tied to the corners. Once our must is filtered, the resulting liquid is called the wine, which is a bit confusing as it's not yet fermented. I tended to call it the wash, which is a less ambiguous term from distilling, but technically not correct, although everyone will know what you mean if you use it. And we are back to cleaning up. I probably didn't need to include it, but otherwise, how else would you understand my pain? Now that we have our wash, we want to sanitize it by bringing it to a boil. I'm going to put the pot on the big burner, even so it'll take a while to heat. Next, I'm going to add some sugar. For this wine, I'm going to add 6 kilograms of brown sugar, probably close to the maximum that will ferment. Too much sugar will act as a preservative, preventing fermentation. Typically, I will use the same quantity of white sugar, but the plums from this tree are not the best flavour, so I feel okay using brown sugar to give the wine a rich port flavour. You can use white sugar, brown sugar, raw sugar, dextrose, or any other fermentable sugar you can obtain. If you want a drier wine, that is to say less sweet, you can use less sugar. However, you also need to take into account the type of yeast you use. Different yeasts will tolerate different concentrations of sugar and alcohol. The yeast will stop converting sugar to alcohol when either there is no sugar left or the alcohol concentration gets high enough and the yeast die. There is sugar in the plum juice, notably fructose, so if you increase or decrease the amount of plums in your wash, you will need to do the opposite with the sugar, although the additional sugar is by far the biggest contributor to the total sugar content. And finally, we've reached our last bag of sugar. I'm going to stir the sugar in to help dissolve it and distribute the heat evenly through the wash. I'm going to give the bucket a quick rinse off with boiling water, technically not necessary as the star sand used earlier is harmless to the fermentation once it is broken down. Once I'm done, I'm going to add the remaining boiling water to the bucket, as we're going to want to dilute our wash. Boiled water is sanitized, where water straight from the tap is not. We've reached just over 60 degrees Celsius, and we've got a while yet to go before we reach boiling point. In terms of selecting a bucket as a fermenter, there is a magical phrase that you need to see, and that is food grade. There is still quite a bit of flavour in our pulp. White, often I will use this as the basis of filling for a plum pie, but in this instance, as many of the plums were from the ground and unwashed, I'm going to throw it out. Boiling water can be time consuming, and as I know in advance that I need to top up our wash or wine, I'm going to make a head start. I need to stir the wash to distribute the heat before checking the temperature so I can get an accurate reading. And we're still a long way from boiling. As we get close to boiling, it's useful to put the pot lid on to keep the heat in. And I'm still preloading the boiling water for when we add the wash to the bucket. And we are now much closer to boiling. In fact, sustaining 80 degrees for a few minutes is probably more than sufficient to sanitize our wash. And finally, we are up to temperature, so we can turn the stove off. To make it easier to transfer from the pot to the bucket, I'm going to get the handles out of the way and move the bucket against the pot. I'm just scooping the wash into the bucket through a sieve to make sure there are no chunky bits, for which there were none. Be super careful, as the wash is both boiling hot and sticky, a rather dangerous combination. The pot is now light enough for me to safely tip the remainder directly into the bucket. And still we are topping up the bucket with boiling water. Once we have topped up enough, we are done for today, and we'll need to wait until tomorrow until our wash is cool enough to be able to add yeast. It's now the next day, and we are back to sanitizing everything that is going to touch our wash. The wash is cool again, and we don't want to infect it with any stray yeast or bacteria. I'm using a Star San clone, which is an acid-based sanitizer. It kills yeast and bacteria on contact, but requires a couple of minutes to do so. The wash is now cool enough that we can add yeast. I'm using a specific wine yeast from Mangrove Jack called SN9. The description for SN9 reads, "Very good all-round strain, best choice for high alcohol and fortified wines, but also excellent for most country wines, sweet sparkling wines and ciders." And as we are making a sweet high alcohol country wine, it suits us perfectly. I'm just rinsing off the spoon with boiling water. This is just my paranoia, as it should be well sanitized with the acid sanitizer. I'm giving our wash a good stir for two reasons. Firstly, to distribute the yeast, and second, to make sure our wash is well mixed so that we can take correct readings. After giving the wash a thorough stirring, I left it for a few minutes to settle down. We now want to take a specific gravity reading. This will essentially tell us how much sugar is dissolved in our wash. I gave it a spin to make sure there were no bubbles attached to it, which can give us a wrong reading. There are 3 scales on our hydrometer. Firstly, Brix, which is a measure of sugar content. Every 1 degree of Brix indicates 1 gram of sucrose per 100 grams of liquid. Secondly, specific gravity is a measure of the density of the liquid relative to water. Pure water has a specific gravity of 1.000. Anything dissolved in it, like sugar, increases the density and raises the number above 1. The last is potential alcohol, which indicates the maximum alcohol content we are likely to achieve. It is, of course, very important that we record everything we do so that if something goes wrong or right, we are able to work out what caused it. I'm noting down our specific gravity. We can use another measurement after fermentation to work out the alcohol content. And noting down the temperature is also useful, as our measurements are calibrated at 20 degrees Celsius, so we may need to make an adjustment. Now all that is done, we can seal up our wine for fermentation. This bucket is 5 to 10 years old, and I'm not certain how well it seals. Airtight is good, but not necessary. To the hole I drilled in the bucket, I am adding a grommet to make a good seal against the airlock. I'm using boiling water in the airlock, as sometimes it can end up in the wash and we don't want to use something that will contaminate it. Here's a trick for new players. Make sure the bucket handle is opposite the airlock, otherwise it gets stuck below the airlock and you can't use it. I'm making a label for the bucket for the things I want to know at a glance. This is batch number 201. The plums are from our big plum tree. I don't know the actual variety. The type of yeast was SN9, the sugar, which is brown, and the date. My appalling handwriting can partially be attributed to me trying to keep things in frame. Once I've stuck the label on and this batch of wine can be identified, I can set it aside with all the other wines until it's finished fermenting. And now we need to wait until fermentation is done, at which point we can bottle. But that's the subject of a future video. If you enjoyed this video or otherwise found it useful, please like and subscribe. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and this will give me indications as to what to cover next. But until then, I'm Master Christie, and I'll see you in a future video.